Before we get this show started, let's hear from our sponsor. Angler's Coffee roasts a full range of coffees with one goal in mind, delivering excellent coffee to every single angler. And I'm one of those anglers who loves Angler's Coffee. Great tasting, robust, and good to go. And if you haven't noticed, this is Dave from the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I'm here because I'm good friends with Greg, and we are both supporting a great coffee company, and you should too. Angler's Coffee just released a new subscription program, and you can get 22% off, not just 20% off. We're going the extra distance here. 22% off of this box and all products at anglerscoffee.com. Just use the coupon code FFI20 at checkout to get 22% off of great coffee today. That's anglerscoffee.com.
Hey, Fly Fishing Insiders, what's up? We are here with Justin and Stanton from Togans. They are our show sponsor. Hey, Justin, what's going on for Togans this year? What's new and what's coming down the pipe for us tires?
This year we got a whole new range of dubbing coming out, along with our shadow dubbing, most popular, as well as our prism dubbing. The shadow dubbing is a nice multicolored dubbing, where the prism is a bit more of a reflective type of dubbing.
Stanton, as part of Togans Pro Team Tire, what do you enjoy most about both these dubbings?
With the shadow dubbing, I love the blend, and I love how soft it is. It ties beautifully for leech and damsel patterns, having the two different shades of natural olive colors. And the prism dubbing is fantastic for Euro nymphs, or if you want to put hot spots, like have your nymphs or your leeches really pop, you add in some of that prism dubbing because it really jumps out.
Perfect. And Justin, where can we find these dubbings?
Both of these dubbings are available now on our website at togansflyshop.com. You can find them under the dubbings collection. Excellent.
All right, guys, let's get back to the show. Welcome to the Fly Fishing Insider podcast. I'm your host, Greg Keenan. This is season 3 of the Fly Fishing Insider podcast. In this episode, we aim to bring you the biggest and best stories from those who work and make our fly fishing industry truly great. The Fly Fishing Insider podcast dives deep into the past, present, and future of all our guests, uncovering their amazing stories and journey. Join us each week as we interview a new podcast guest. Also, if you're new to the show or not yet a subscriber, make sure you hit subscribe after this episode. Welcome to the Fly Fishing Insider podcast, and this is our how-to series. In this series, we're going to learn how to fish for striped bass in still waters, and who else to reach out to but our friend Henry Cowen. Henry, how are you? I said your name wrong, but you know what? We got it right.
I'm good. That's okay. You call me anything. Listen, I grew up as a Hank. So, now that we're talking a second time, you can even call me Hank and I'll answer to it.
Definitely. Welcome back to the show again. Super pumped that you're here. Since we last talked there in the wintertime, the episode's done well. Things have gone good. The book's done well. I had to bring you back because I wanted to touch base specifically on a how-to series because that's super important to point out in this fishery. So let's just jump right into it and get down to the nitty-gritty of how to fish for striped bass in still water. So, what do I need? Walk me through it.
Okay, well, obviously to start, we probably should talk about equipment to begin.
Yeah.
And striped bass, stripers can go anywhere from 2-3 pounds up to, on my lake, an average fish can go 10, 12, and we get fish 15, 20, and we've caught them up to, the biggest one I've seen on fly is 38 pounds. So they can get pretty big, and lakes across the country, they'll average anywhere. I would say you're going to be looking at fish that average anywhere from 5 to 12 pounds on average. So that being said, you probably want to start out with a saltwater type rod, like an 8 or a 9 weight. That would be the ideal rod, 9'8", 9'9". You could get away with a 7. There's no question. Matter of fact, if you're hybrid fishing, I'd probably suggest the 7 versus stripers because hybrids generally are in that 1 to 4 pound class, 1 to 6 pound class. So 7 weight would be a lot of fun with hybrids, where the 8 and the 9 would be more striper like. As far as reels go, anything that can hold 150 yards of backing. Stripers pull and they run and they can get you in backing, but they're not going to get you 100 yards into backing. They might get you they might get you 100 feet into backing. So anything with 150 yards and a good drag, as far as a reel goes, will suffice. And, quite frankly, as long as it's Lamson Waterworks, it's perfectly fine.
There you are.
Isn't that who we paid our bills with back in January?
You know it.
No, I'm kidding, though. So I'm just trying to recall who the sponsor was back in January. But anyway, how about that? So anything with a good drag will work. And then as far as lines go, so here's the most important thing. If it was me, I would go out with 2 outfits. Okay? If I was fishing in a river, you can get away with 1. But in a Stillwater, you want to go out with 2 outfits. You want to have a slow sinking intermediate line on one rod, and you want a fast sinking line on another rod. And the reason is because sometimes the fish are on top or are feeding maybe down to 5 to 7 feet, and that intermediate will work beautifully. There are a lot of times when the fish are more secretive and they're not showing themselves, and now you got to hunt and go subsurface, and these fish could be sitting 10, 15, 20, 25 feet below, and a fast sinking line is going to be the answer to that. And once again, any manufacturer's line is good as long as it's Cyangler.
The sonar series, series, right?
There you go. Listen, I am a Sonar Titan guy, okay?
Yeah.
Just so you know. And I'm not kidding. And by the way, all the companies are making good lines today, whether it's Orvis or Rio or Airflow. They're all making good stuff. But I am a Cyangler guy through and through. So I love their Sonar Titan series. I love their 357, especially that 357 hover line for a sink, for a fast sink. And then I've been using their clear camo intermediate lately for the slow sinking intermediate. They just do a great job, great customer service, and the lines, the coatings hold up over time better than anybody else's lines, in my opinion. So anyway, you need 2 lines out there. All right, slow sinking and a fast sinking. As far as leader setup goes, on the intermediate setup, a 7-foot with, let's say, a 16-pound tippet. I like fluoro, but you don't have to use fluoro. You can use mono. And then for the fast sinking, just a straight piece of 5 foot of 20-pound test. You can get away with 16. I like 20 because when I'm fishing sinking lines, sometimes I'm near trees, and if I got to pull a fish out of a tree, I'd rather have 20-pound tippet rather than 16. And then, as far as flies go, boy, I'll tell you what, there are a million flies out there that catch striped bass. I will just tell you that some of our best patterns, my book that I wrote, I only listed 13 patterns. And the reason I did so is because I said you could put a fly box together with these 13 patterns and take it across the country, and in any river or lake situation where they have stripers or hybrids, you've got those 13 flies in your box, you will catch stripers and hybrids. If you had to nail me, what are the most important? There's probably 3 flies that I'd say you can't live without. Okay? And in no particular order. A Clouser minnow is critical. Okay? A Clouser catches everything. It's taken more fish across the planet than any other fly. And it's still, with stripers and hybrids, it's one of our go-to flies. Another fly that's really great is Blaine Chocolate's Game Changers. The Game Changer is just a fabulous new pattern that I have been catching stripers on for years. And, I was one of Blaine's fly testers back in the day when he was toying with these things. I was getting these things to play with way back in the day, and they are just fabulous. The last fly that's important is a fly that I designed called a Something Else. And a Something Else mimics a 2-inch threadfin shad, which are predominant on lakes across the United States. You can tie them 3 inches, 2 inches, but when striped bass get on juvenile threadfin shad, and threadfin shad can go up to 5-6 inches in size, but when they get on those 2 and 3 inch long shad, especially the 1.5 to 2 inch shad, Lefty once said to me when I asked him, I said, Lefty, you fished all over the world. What's the hardest fish you ever had to tease to eat a fly? He didn't even hesitate. He said, Henry, striped bass when they're on small threadfin shad. They can be buggers. And this something else fly has, quote unquote, cracked the code when they're on small threadfin. So those are the three flies that you absolutely have to have. If you're going to fish topwater, you can certainly bring a floating line and throw, a topwater fly like a gurgler or a crease fly, or my favorite is Charlie Bisharat's pole dancer, which walks the dog side to side. That's my favorite topwater fly to fish if you're going to get them on the surface. But so you need subsurface flies most of the time, and you need to tie a loop knot on your rig. I am a big fan of the Cray loop or the Uni loop or any of those loop knots. And so that's your equipment. Okay. So to start, you got to have, you can fish these things, by the way, from the shoreline, but most people are going to fish them out of a boat. I don't care what kind of boat you have. Whatever boat you have needs to have a fish finder, needs to have an electric trolling motor, needs to have a set of binoculars. That's the three things you need in your boat. And, if you have room for a fourth, put in a stripping bucket. Because when these fish are on top and coming up and busting bait, they don't stay up long. And so all you need is one cleat or one big foot to blow your cast. And you just sit there and think about the fish that you could have caught that night, but, you stepped on your line or it wrapped around your cleat. So having a good stripping bucket or a stripping basket around your waist would be helpful to manage your line. So that's, from an equipment standpoint, that's everything you need.
So then let's talk about where. Okay, so you got the equipment. Now, how do you fish for these fish?
Okay, so when the fish are on top and they're busting on the surface, what you need to look to see what is usually happening, and this is the big mistake most anglers make. I can't tell you how many times I've gone out in November, December, and they're on small threadfin shad. Now, this isn't the case when they're on bigger baits. But when they're on those juvenile threadfin shad, you'll see fish busting the surface on top. And people think they could throw a topwater fly at them, but they can't. And the reason is the fish are coming from underneath. The bait is literally anywhere from 1 foot to 3 foot under the surface. The fish comes up, rushes up to the top, opens its mouth, takes in a scoopful of threadfin shad, gives a kick with its tail to go back down. When you see that bust on the top, that fish is already eaten. That's the tail kick. You're seeing the flush made by the fish going back down. So it's always best to throw intermediate lines, even to fish that you see busting the surface. You will just simply catch more fish. The key to fishing for these things, whether you're fishing an intermediate line on top to busting fish or even a sinking line, to fish that I'll see spaghetti on my fish finder that are 25 feet down, and across my entire screen, you'll just see fish after fish after fish. And if you go to my Instagram page, that's Henry Cowen, you'll get to see some screenshots that I posted previously of spaghetti on the machine that's 20, 25 feet down. That's all striped bass. The whole key is to fish the countdown method to those fish. So in other words, when we're fishing that Sonar Titan, that hover line, that 357, those lines sink about 6 inches per second. So that means that line sinks 1 foot every 2 seconds. So if I see fish at 20 feet, I just have to double that. So a 40-second count gets my fly 20 feet down. If I see fish at 10 feet, a 20-second count gets my fly 10 feet down. So all you have to do is see where the fish are, double the count from that number, and your fly is now sitting in those fish. Now, the next part of the game is the retrieve, and the retrieve is vital in order to catch striped bass because they can be so finicky. The retrieve that we use are short, quick strips, followed by a 2 to 3 second pause. And one of the biggest mistakes I see, and we do that whether the fish are 20 feet down or even if the fish are busting bait on top. The hardest thing to do is when you're seeing fish bust on top is to tell your customer, pause 2 seconds, and he thinks 2 seconds is 1, 2, and he starts stripping. I want you counting Mississippis. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, strip, strip, strip. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, strip, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. And that's what I'm doing. It's all about the pause. The stripers and the hybrids will eat on the pause 90% of the time. And the guy that doesn't pause is the guy that doesn't hook up. That is the key to success. Short 3 to 6 inch quick strips followed by a 3 second pause. But I will tell you, when you're in the middle of a blitz and there are fish on top,
it's hard. Yeah.
Most 3 second pauses are. I have one of my very dear friends, I'll never forget, Matt Strohmeyer, called me up, and he's down there fishing our lake on Lanier, and he's like, man, they were up and I couldn't get them to feed, and I had this something else on, and blah, 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 blah. I said, Matt, you're not pausing long enough. He goes, really? I said, I don't know. I'm telling you, if you think you're counting to 3, then count to 5. Called me the next day, said I got 6 fish today. I wasn't waiting long enough. It's exciting when you see fish on top. Shoot, Greg, I can't tell you how many times I've taken customers that have never seen a striper blitz on the surface, and I pull them up to the side of the fish, and I go, okay, and nobody's casting. They're all sitting there with their mouths open going, wow, look at that. Look at all these fish along the side of the boat on top. I'm like, would somebody please cast the line? You know, it's very exciting.
Huh. So then
I also had a guy, let me just tell you one other quick story. I had a guy who was fishing my boat with a 2-handed rod once, and he had arthritis, so he had to use 2-handed rods, and he was booming out 70, 80-foot casts, in practice before the fish started doing their thing. And at 7:30 in the morning, I said, okay, here we go. And the next 2 shots that I had him take, he stepped on his line, wrapped it once around the trolling motor. It's buck fever. He just got too excited. So we pulled up to the fish the 3rd time after he blew the first 2 casts, and I said, close your eyes. He goes, what? I said, close your eyes. I said, now make the cast where you think they are. And he boomed it out 70 feet, and boom, we hooked up immediately. He just got too excited, and that's what happens. Unfortunately, we see it all the time during a striper blitz,
I wish I could experience that. The striper blitz, definitely. All right, Henry. So
the striper blitz.
You talked a bit about the techniques. You talked about the gear. Now, what are we looking for structure?
Okay, so there's a lot of different structures on lakes. I mean, there's a ton of them. I think your most important structure are points, and a point is basically. Let me put it to you this way: you're driving on a lake, and you're driving down the lake or up the lake, and all of a sudden you're coming up to a cove. And the cove is on the left side, and that cove goes back a quarter of a mile. When you get to that mouth of that cove, there's a point on the left side and a point on the right side. Those are what we call points. And I think fishing points are probably your number 1 structure. Your number 2 structure behind points are fishing humps. And humps are nothing more, and I think we talked about this, if I remember correctly, on the first podcast. Humps are nothing more than mounds. Yeah, they're mounds above the water, and that come up from the bottom. So all of a sudden, you're driving and you're in 50 foot of water, and all of a sudden you look, there's nothing around you. You're in the middle of the lake, and all of a sudden you stop and you see you're in 18 feet of water. You just came upon an underwater hump. Humps are really, really important. The bait and the fish get around the humps all the time, and the most important part of the hump is to find the brush pile that's on the hump. What I'll do is I'll take my boat and drive up to a hump when I'm not fishing, and when I find a hump, and I'll just drive all around in going 3 miles an hour on that hump with my big motor. And when I locate a brush pile on that hump, I mark it with my GPS. And now I know, because some humps are the size of a baseball infield. It could be that big from first base to third base. And so that's how big the hump can be. But if the brush pile is at second base, that's where you're going to find your fish, right at second base on that hump where the brush is. So finding brush on a hump is really important structure. Finding flats are very important. Flats are shallow areas where the water will warm up more quickly. And coming into the springtime, fish love to get on flats when the water warms up. And so that's another really good piece of structure. And then finally, another really good piece of structure to talk about are what we call saddles and blow-throughs. And a saddle and a blow through are basically one and the same. The only difference is a blow through is very shallow and a saddle is very deep. And what that basically is, Greg, is if we're on the shoreline and we're driving along the shoreline and all of a sudden the shoreline is on our left and all of a sudden we're coming up to an island on the right. When you go in between that island and that shoreline, there's usually going to be a blow through if it's very, very shallow between the island and the shoreline, or it'll be a saddle, which could be very deep, could be 18 feet down. And it's basically like a sandbar that goes across from the island across to the land. Those are blow throughs and saddles, and bait gets on those places, and fish use those areas to find food. And basically, what we're basically doing on a lake is you're starting in the channel, and the fish get in the channel and dry. They basically run all over the lake, and they use the channel as the highway, but they got to get off and feed somewhere. And the bait isn't always sitting in the channel. So the bait is sitting on structure. And it's important for you to know which structure is where the bait is and what time of year the bait should be on that structure, because they're not on blow-throughs and saddles the same time that they're on points, or the same time that they're on what do we call it? Not the sandbars, the
humps.
shoot fire. My mind went blank.
The humps.
They could be on not the humps, but I was also thinking the shallow areas when flats. We get them on a flat.
Yeah.
Yeah, they won't be on the flats the same time that they're on humps, so they're on points. So it's all a matter of what is the water temperature dictate where the bait can be, and it's just a matter of keeping notes. You make a log. When, it's important to know to go out when you're successful and write down, where did I find the fish? Where would I find the bait? It's also important to write down the days you go out and you're not successful and say, where didn't I find the bait? Where didn't I find the fish today that I looked? Because when you start putting those pieces of the puzzle together, it's all going to be the same. All of a sudden, you're going to go, man, I was fishing a flat in November and I didn't see any fish on it. And then you went in December and fished a flat one day and there was no fish on it. And all of a sudden you went in April or March and there was fish on the flat. Well, what was the water temp that day?
Yeah.
Those are the pieces of the puzzle you got to relate to and put together. And keeping a diary or a log can shorten that learning curve, because as you get to my age, it's a lot harder to remember things.
Isn't it? That's for sure. So, Henry, what would some final words be in order to help people get more stripers in a Stillwater setting?
Well, you got to have perseverance. It's a challenging. I'm going to tell you, it's not an easy fishery, but it is an incredibly rewarding fishery. These fish pull so freaking hard. I mean, let me just tell you, when you hook an 8-pound striper on an 8-weight rod, it would be like taking that Clouser minnow and putting it to the bumper of a Toyota Tundra and having the guy hit the gas. That's what the initial run is going to feel like. So it is a very rewarding fishery, just because these things, not only are they just a beautiful fish, they really are an incredibly handsome animal, but they are a great competitor. They pull hard. They are not easy. They are challenging. And once you figure it out, you can have a ball, because you can catch these things in water 10, 12 inches deep when they're running the banks and blowing up bait along the bank, and you can catch them in deep water. So we can catch them almost all year. The only time we can't catch them is when that water temp really gets above 80 degrees, and then they go deep and they try to stay alive in low oxygen, warm environments. But from the rest of the year, I would just tell you, just stick at it, stay with it, and keep in mind that even if you don't have a ton of fly rodders where you are, go into the bait and tackle shop and find out what the gear guys are doing, because once they know the pattern and they tell you what the pattern is, you can mimic that pattern with your fly line, depending on what water column the fish are feeding in at that time of year. So the gear guy can be really helpful.
Excellent. You know, Henry, I absolutely love it. So there you are. That's basically, how to catch stripers in Stillwater with our mini series here. So Henry, I definitely want to thank you for being a guest on our show.
Well, Greg, thanks for having me back again. I know it's been a few months since we last did the first podcast, but I'm absolutely delighted to be back with you guys.
And I still owe you a steelhead trip, so we'll have to get you up here soon.
I'm looking forward to it, buddy.
You bet. So, all right, Henry, thanks a lot. Thank you, audience. You've been listening to the Fly Fishing Insider podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, tell us by liking this episode and subscribing to the show. Also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. See you next week.